Mafia 1 was a really great game. I really enjoyed everything about Mafia 1. The gameplay, the story which is its most focused point, was what I enjoyed the most. But when it came to Mafia 2, I was expecting something. The thing I was expecting the most was to see who this character is. Who's this character that comes and kills Tommy Angelo? And we do eventually get that. The problem I have with Mafia 2 isn't its story on its own. If you view Mafia 2 as a standalone story all on its goddamn well own, then it's okay. It's actually an okay, decent story. But if you view it as a sequel to Mafia 1, then it's a bit of an issue there, because the entirety of Mafia 2 is based on the character that kills Tommy Angelo. And now the events leading up to Tommy Angelo's death was what I was very interested in when I played Mafia 2. The problem here is that when you get to that point, when you finally arrive to that point of when you kill Tommy Angelo, the game's almost finished. It is the third last mission of the game. Third or second last mission of the game, where you are tasked with killing a former mafia member from a former family that no longer existed. It was a favor or two, and so you were given a car and the gun and what exactly you're supposed to say, and hence the scene that happens at the end of Mafia 1. Now, in the themes of the game, this somewhat makes sense, but in the aspect of it being a sequel, this kind of falls apart. Because, in essence, the entire game has nothing to do with Tommy Angelo. He has not been mentioned, Don Salieri has not been mentioned. Anything that happens in 7th Heaven never is mentioned throughout the entirety of the game. This is a non-priority. Hell, it went so far as to give you the car that they drive up to Tommy Angelo is of no significance. The gun and what he says is of no significance to Vito as a character. All of these things end up having no significance to Vito's story. Killing Tommy Angelo was just killing Tommy Angelo for the money, because essentially at that point in the story, Vito and Joe need money. They need money badly. They need money so badly they would do anything to get money, right? Obviously, because of what happened prior to that, the whole entire story of Vito is his life through the Mafia family, from when he joined to when he has to make a very big decision at the end of the game. This is the crux of Vito's story, but the point that it takes a turn for the worse for Vito is when his friend Henry gets mauled to death by the Chinese, right? And in that sequence, if you played in retrospect, you understand why the Chinese were mauling him, because he is technically a Fed. And so they took care of a problem for them, but they didn't see it that way, and so they went and shot up the entire Chinese mob, killing the representative there, which is kind of a big problem. But now, even after killing the representative there, they now have to still pay back all the money that they've borrowed to do this little drug side hustle with Henry. Because they needed money, a friend of theirs, part of the Don Corleone family, gave them the job to take care of Tommy Salieri. That takes care of half their debt. And so you do this job to get half your debt. It has no bearings on Vito's character, it has no bearings on Joe's character. This person is a non-entity to these individuals, and that kind of sours me a little bit, not in terms of the entire story of Mafia 2, but specifically on the idea of how the first story is treated. It is treated as not being a thing. It had happened, yes, but it's completely not that important to Vito. And the way it is read at the very end of the first game, it had seemed like it was going to be something of import, right? That this is someone related to Salieri. Salieri is hiring someone from inside of prison. He somewhat works for Salieri in some way, shape, or form. It seemed like that. It could even be read like that. But it turns out that's not the case. It is more so that they were doing it for the job and for the money. So what I don't understand is why the elaborate car, why the words that need to be said. Was it something that the Mafia would say in terms of this world? I would assume that's the case, as they are part of the family, so that they would obviously mention the name of their Don before they take out a target. But since they're not part of Salieri's family, they work for Don Corleone, they were instructed to say that thing. So I don't understand the elaborate nature of it. why the elaborate nature for taking out this one guy. At the same time, the story wants to say, well, he gets killed by a random Joe that has nothing to do with his life, but at the same time, you want to say he is killed in a very elaborate manner. The story itself conflicts with itself, being that it wants to stay canon to the first game, but at the same time make some changes, or have the story not be entirely related to Tommy Angelo. But besides the fact that it's not related to Tommy Angelo, it's a rather decent story. Vito goes through some shit. Vito goes through a lot in this story, all the way until the very end of the game, where he had a point where he rose, right, in terms of money, in terms of fame. He rose a little bit, but then completely fell at that certain point which I had just mentioned. And so it's a very interesting story, seeing how Vito's life unfolds, from him coming back from war, from him going to prison, coming out of prison, and then him joining the families, making a name for himself, and then completely ruining all of that for just one thing. It's great. It's a great story. The gameplay, on the other hand, is a little bit different. It still takes all the hallmarks. It has its own unique flair to the Mafia series, and so the driving and what have you are still as realistic as Mafia would like it to be. They added another gameplay element that is only in Mafia 2. It's not in Mafia 1 Definitive Edition, and it's not in Mafia 3. It was taken out in Mafia 3, and that is the fist fighting mechanic. It is not something that is complex, but it is something that has some form of complexity over Mafia 1 and Mafia 3. Mafia 1 Definitive Edition and Mafia 3. That complexity specifically is the way that you have to actually dodge enemy attacks. You have to time your parries correctly so that your enemy doesn't do more damage to you, because on higher difficulties, this is something that is actually difficult. They do a lot of damage to you. They can do 1-2 punches and you're down. And so that's why it has some level of a learning curve when you're on higher difficulties. On easier difficulties, it's pretty easy. The parry timings are very, very generous, and the dodge timings are also very, very generous. So once you on a higher difficulty, it actually forces you to learn the very simple mechanics that is this fist fighting mini game. But Mafia 2 in its entirety, in its entire package, is not exactly a sequel to Mafia 1, but at the same time it has a decent enough story to hold its own, which is more than I can say for Mafia 3.